Hi there, and welcome to the CyberHut TV vendor introduction series. My name is Simon Moffat. I'm founder and research analyst at the CyberHut. And in these vendor introduction series, I get to sit down with super smart founders from a whole host of startups all across the identity world to understand a little bit more about their mission and vision to change and solve some of today's prescient problems. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Jens from Kontext Security join me. Jens, thank you for taking some time out.
Thank you so much, Simon. Looking forward.
Not at all. As I always say, I get the easy job. I just ask a few easy questions. You're doing the hard work, I guess, building companies and building a platform to solve some of our major issues we have. And for those who haven't seen one of these episodes before, I always sort of run through the same three questions to understand a bit more about Jens's vision. And I always start off with the same question, and that's what is the problem that Context Security are looking to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Simon. Happy to elaborate a little bit. I think in general, it's important to kind of like look at the surrounding environment around us and think about kind of like what's actually a problem worth solving, right? And what we see at the moment is that, there's mostly engineers running Cloud Code, Codex, and so on, and multitude of other agents in production, right? As well as basically commercial teams querying databases and basically SaaS tools on their endpoints as well as through their cloud infrastructure, right? And the problem really is that there's no real policy enforcement on top of it that can distinguish between kind of like the human user that actually does an agent, that does an action in kind of like an actual corporate environment versus the actual agent that does it on behalf of the human, right? So you really have kind of like no runtime visibility into what agents are actually doing, right? Like, and what tools are being called. And what we're really trying to build is an authorization layer for that, right? So trying to solve the authorization gap that you currently have in AI agent deployments in a more holistic fashion, right? And provide runtime enforcement to actually, yeah, basically enforce what AI agents can actually do once they're running. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a complex thing, isn't it? I think we've struggled with authorization. I think in general, past whatever 2 decades. I think with the sort of human world, we've tried to externalize authorization from core applications, core logic, and try to sort of say, look, we need a policy-based access control system or an externalized authorization system. And I think in theory, that's quite a well understood concept with your policy decision points, your enforcement points, policies. And it's easy to understand. It's often, I think, quite difficult to get there. But I think what's obviously happened the last, say, 2 years, I guess, is the AI thing has exploded, hasn't it? And it's really, I think it's amplified some of those key vulnerabilities in access control, enforcement, just-in-time access, and I guess all of the vulnerabilities. I guess we're sort of known for a long time in the human space. And I guess why is it becoming a problem now? Is it the fact that AI agents, this sort of new breed of technology, is sort of generating new authorization challenges? Is it because those sort of legacy human-centric policy-based systems just they can't keep abreast? What's sort of really happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, it's there's really three things that are colliding, kind of like at the moment as we speak at once, right? So first of all, obviously, kind of like agents are already running in production, right? So it's not really kind of like a theoretical problem. There's autonomous agents running in corporations for 24 hours a day, for example. And really, that means kind of like that the adoption is kind of like outpacing the actual security, right? Like, so the blast radius is kind of like unconstrained and it's growing every week. And there's like little insight in terms of what we can actually do. Second thing is like none of the existing tools really work here, right? Identity and access management, secrets managers, right? Like PAM. It's kind of like everything has been designed for kind of like a human principle interacting in front of kind of like a screen and clicking buttons, right? The key point here is that agents are non-deterministic, right? Like they're probabilistic actors, where you can't really set basically what the agent can do ahead of time, right? Like it's an important component to also be able to do that. But the secondary thing is kind of like, okay, like what does the actual user tell the agent, and then what does the agent actually do, right? Like does it align with kind of like what the user actually told the agent to do? And that's really kind of like none of the existing tools from kind of like the past few decades that have approached this were designed for kind of like this new non-deterministic actor, right? And I think that the third one, the third important kind of like aspect around kind of like why this is a problem now is like a little bit less talked about, whereas the two I mentioned before are a little bit more talked about. And it's really like that organizations, there's like a very like it's a very overlapping kind of like function that you need to take in order to implement this, right? So there's no real clear ownership inside of organizations for the specific problem to be solved, right? Like so it's kind of like overlapping between platform engineering, the actual security team, as well as basically centralized AI teams that are bringing AI adoption forward in practice, right? But I think this is kind of like one crucial thing that needs to be solved in the future. It's not only the mitigation, but also kind of like who has the responsibility of kind of like owning this, right? Like, and at what point do we actually implement it, right? Yeah.
It's like a, it's almost like a perfect storm, isn't it? Obviously, AI adoption is, as you say, it's skyrocketed because I guess the benefits, whether it's productivity or whatever it can be, they're really tangible. So we see this huge adoption angle, but I think there's the interesting thing is around this security and identity gap where it's almost you have this sort of hockey curve of adoption for AI, but the sort of it's more of a linear innovation, if you like, of security and identity, which it can't keep up, can it? Because historically, you mentioned things like PAM or credentials and secrets management. They were primarily thinking for the human-centric world, but then even the workload slash NHI world, it was very deterministic to use it. The counterpoint there it was sort of known. The payloads were known, maybe going backwards and forwards between two APIs. Sort of you expected certain characteristics of a JSON payload running at this time of the day, and it ping pong between, and everything was fine. Whereas, as you described there, these agents are doing strange things. It is non-deterministic. It's behaving as part of like an optimization approach, and it does seem this perfect storm of the legacy tech can't keep up, but the AI world, if you like, is just accelerating sort of super fast there. And I guess that sort of brings us to, what are you guys been sort of working on and thinking about? And you talk about authorization there, but I also want to sort of bring in another keyword, which is intent management and behavior and looking at trying to solve some of these sort of non-deterministic issues there. So what are you guys working on? How are you guys best placed to try and solve some of these authorization challenges?
Yeah, absolutely, right. Like, I think in general, like a common pattern that you see is that, which is also correct, by the way, is basically that most people are starting from observability and kind of like actual visibility into kind of like what the agent is actually doing. The thing is that most tools that you can actually get kind of like stop there because the actual kind of like blocking part is the really hard part, right? So you really kind of like can see what's happening, but can't really do anything about it at the latency that is actually required, right? So we really start with the actual enforcement point, right? And what we actually build is basically what you get is essentially a policy layer that is at the tool call level, right? Like basically outlining which agent acting on behalf of which user can actually access what resource, right? And we're trying to be as invisible as possible towards the actual developers and end users, right? So basically for Claude, you just type Claude and it just works, right? There's no real workflow disruption. And our architecture is really kind of like centralized decision and then kind of like federated enforcement, right? So you don't really have kind of like a single point of failure whenever kind of like new agent runtime ships, right? And so we're approaching this kind of like enforcement point from two angles. One is essentially deterministic, the other one is non-deterministic. So more from a probabilistic standpoint, so you can say like, okay, this agent can do this and that, right? Like that's set deterministic based on kind of like the user that is actually acting with it. And then there's a second layer where you can actually determine, okay, like based on kind of like the sequence of tool calls, is the next invocation of kind of like a tool call actually safe in the context of kind of like what we're currently operating in. And that the key point here is that the risk is not really kind of like usually a single bad call, but it's kind of like a sequence that kind of like iterates towards a certain direction. And that's what we're really trying to focus on, right? Like, and I think like essentially us as a team, we bring kind of like a unique combination of a lot of different backgrounds. Essentially around kind of like secure computing, applied cryptography. We've experienced with kind of like all of the bigger policy languages, and we also have experience in AI. So we can basically adapt for this deterministic side as well as this non-deterministic side, which only together allows for kind of like a coherent solution.
It is fascinating. I think it definitely. I think the complexity does introduce that need to have, as you say, multiple stakeholders, different views, and sort of new, diverse view of how to solve the problem. But I think as well, you mentioned there that there's multiple different parts to this: coarse-grained, fine-grained, toolchain access, standard, I guess, access / authorization, permissions style things. Can the agent do this particular thing? But then there's also that, as you say, there's the tool aspect, and then what the agent is perhaps doing within that tool. Maybe they gain access to bash or a command line, but then what they can do within that as well, I think, is interesting. The other one that you mentioned there, which I jotted down, was this sort of sequencing concept, isn't it? I think 15, 20 years ago we talked about human-centric authorization, and it's like, right, well, Simon has read access, and it was like a one-off event almost. You weren't then looking at maybe what I was then going to do downstream or what that could potentially lead to. And that sequencing thing seems I think it's quite an old concept, but I think it's becoming really relevant, isn't it? Around the agent may start here, but what's it going to go on and do in the future? That seems quite important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I mean, in general, as models are getting better, I don't think this is a problem that will be solved just by kind of like, like the inherent intelligence of the model, due to kind of like the foundational nature of probabilistic decisions, right? There's not really much you can do about that, even on kind of like the foundation model layer. I think I'm excited about the future, and we'll see where this goes.
I think it's a huge and exciting problem space to be working on. I think clearly AI is whatever. It's not disappearing, is it? It's going to be something that's going to be here for the next few generations. I would imagine whether it takes over the world or otherwise, time will tell. But I think clearly we need to have different approaches to a whole host of different things. Whether it's on the authorization side, authentication, credentialing, and other. I think looking at things like sequencing, taint analysis, intent. I think we do need to have slightly more sophisticated ways of authorizing essentially access to our most critical assets, which these AI models and the AI infrastructure is going to have access to. So I think it's a hugely exciting space. I'd love to sit down maybe in 6-12 months time and maybe redo this interview and see how things have developed, because I think things are moving so super fast in this space. But I think it's a very fascinating area. I think it's quite a complicated area. I think it's really, industry is starting to now catch up and appreciate, we do need different providers, different solutions, different ways of sort of securing our key assets that sort of feed in to this AI world. So Jens, thank you for taking a little bit of time out from Kontext Security just to sit down and explain a little bit about what you guys are up to. This is certainly a fascinating space, so thank you for sharing your ideas. This has been another episode of the CyberHut Vendor Introduction Series. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.